The Brazilian sun was setting, painting the sky over the lagoon in hues of molten gold and crimson. It was late afternoon on May 4th, 1969. The air was warm and humid, filled with the chirping of insects and the occasional splash of a fish. Antonio da Silva, a 24-year-old private in the Brazilian army, was enjoying a rare day off, completely immersed in the meditative calm of fishing. He sat on a small wooden pier, gazing into the darkening water, his thoughts drifting somewhere between plans for the evening and memories of his recent service. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the coastal trees, creating an illusion of complete solitude. Suddenly, this idyll was shattered by a strange, multi-voiced whisper that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The voices were inhuman, a mixture of high-pitched buzzing and low, guttural mumbling, devoid of any familiar intonation or language. They came from somewhere behind him, from the shore. Antonio instinctively turned, his heart pounding with sudden anxiety. Before he could make out anything in the gathering dusk, a dazzling beam of bluish-white light struck his legs. It wasn't like ordinary light. It felt like physical pressure, cold and paralyzing. His muscles instantly cramped, his legs gave out. The fishing rod slipped from his weakened fingers and fell into the water with a splash. Antonio collapsed onto his knees on the pier's planks, unable to move, seized by an icy terror. Two figures silently glided out from the coastal thickets. They were no taller than a child, about 4 feet, approximately 120 centimeters, but their movements were swift and purposeful. Their bodies were completely hidden by tight-fitting suits that shone with a dull metallic luster, as if made of crumpled aluminum. Their heads were crowned with smooth, opaque helmets without visible visors or openings, resembling inverted bowls. They didn't walk, but rather glided over the ground without making a sound. The beings seized the immobilized Antonio under his arms, their grip surprisingly strong, cold even through the fabric of his shirt, and dragged him away from the lagoon towards the road that ran nearby. There, on the dusty country road, stood an object unlike anything Antonio had ever seen before. It was a smooth, matte gray vertical cylinder, about 10 meters high, with no windows, doors, or visible seams. Only the top and bottom were capped with wide black discs or platforms. A rectangular opening silently appeared in the lower part of the cylinder, emitting a dim internal light. The soldier was roughly pushed inside. The interior was as strange and minimalist as the craft's exterior. The walls were smooth, slightly curved, without any instruments or furniture, except for a few indentations of unclear purpose. The air was cool, with a faint smell of ozone and metal. Barely had the opening closed behind him with a soft hiss when one of the beings deftly placed a helmet on his head, identical to the ones they wore. The helmet was heavy, fitting snugly around his head, blocking most of his vision and muffling sounds. Inside, it smelled sterile, like rubbing alcohol. Antonio felt a slight vibration beneath his feet, which turned into a sensation of smooth but rapid ascent. The ground fell away beneath him. Through small slits in the helmet, he could only see the blurred outlines of his captors. The beings conversed animatedly among themselves in their incomprehensible, chirping, buzzing language. Sometimes they pointed at him or at some points on the walls invisible to him. The flight seemed endlessly long. Antonio lost track of time, disoriented and terrified. There was no sensation of speed or change in direction, only a monotonous hum and a feeling of weightlessness alternating with slight pressure. Finally, the craft shuddered noticeably, and the vibration ceased. The landing was as smooth as the takeoff. Before Antonio could process anything, a thick blindfold was placed over his eyes, plunging him into complete darkness. He was taken by the arms again and led. He felt his feet stepping on a hard surface, heard the echo of his steps in a large space. The route was convoluted, with several turns, as if they were deliberately leading him in circles. At last, he was stopped, and the blindfold was removed. The helmet was still on his head, but now he could see. He found himself in a huge, brightly lit room with high ceilings. The walls were covered with luminous panels displaying flashing, incomprehensible symbols and diagrams. The air here was warmer, but still had the same metallic tang. In the center of the room stood several of the same short beings in aluminum suits, but his attention was immediately drawn to another alien standing slightly apart. He was strikingly different from the others. Firstly, his height. He was significantly taller, almost as tall as Antonio himself. Secondly, his body. As far as could be judged, his suit was different, less concealing, with exposed forearms and neck, was covered in thick hair. Long, almost waist-length, reddish-brown hair covered not only his head but also his arms, and probably his entire body. It was slightly wavy and looked surprisingly soft. His face was hidden not by a helmet, but rather by a complex mask or faceplate, yet it was palpable that he was the leader here. His presence radiated authority and calm power. Then something even stranger happened. The short beings who had accompanied Antonio removed their helmets. Beneath them were faces astonishingly similar to each other, like clones or twins. Pale, grayish skin, large, slanted, completely black eyes without pupils or whites, a small slit for a nose, and a thin, lipless mouth. Their appearance was both childlike and ancient, devoid of any emotion. While Antonio tried to comprehend what he was seeing, several short aliens approached a nearby table where his fishing gear lay, the rod, apparently retrieved by them, line, hooks, floats, and a small can of bait. With obvious curiosity, but no apparent understanding, they examined these items, touching them with their thin, four-fingered hands tipped with suction cups. One of them awkwardly picked up a hook, pricked itself, and quickly withdrew its hand, emitting a short hissing sound that could have been an expression of surprise or pain. They communicated amongst themselves with quiet clicks, examining the float as if it were an artifact of an incomprehensible civilization. Antonio watched this scene with detached horror. The absurdity of the situation battled with chilling fear. Then his gaze drifted further, deeper into the vast hall, and what he saw made his blood run cold. In semi-transparent vertical containers, faintly illuminated from within, were motionless human figures. There were 4 of them, men, naked. They hung suspended in some viscous, amber-colored liquid, their eyes closed, faces serene, as if asleep. One of them was dark-skinned. Antonio felt cold sweat run down his back, and nausea rose in his throat. Were they dead? Or in some state of suspended animation? Had they been previous guests of these beings? This horrifying discovery shattered any remaining hope that this was just a strange dream or hallucination. The terror became palpable, sticky, suffocating. At that moment, the tall, hairy alien, who was clearly the leader, slowly turned towards Antonio. He gestured to one of the short beings. It approached the soldier, holding a strange object, a perfectly cubic glass container. Inside sloshed a thick, dark green liquid, resembling swamp sludge. The being extended the cube glass to Antonio. No words were spoken, but the demand was perfectly clear. He had to drink it. Antonio froze, looking at the glass, then at the emotionless faces of the aliens, and at the horrifying containers with the humans. What was this liquid? Poison? A drug? Part of some experiment? He shook his head, trying to refuse, but the being persistently held the glass before him, and the gaze of the black eye seemed to penetrate through the helmet directly into his soul. Behind him, a low hum was heard, as if some device had been activated. The fear of the unknown, mixed with the threat emanating from these beings, overpowered his will. With trembling hands, he took the heavy, cold cube. The liquid had almost no smell, just a faint grassy metallic hint. Squeezing his eyes shut, Antonio brought the glass to where his mouth should be under the helmet. Apparently, there was an opening or valve, and took a large gulp. The liquid was viscous, tasteless, with a slight minty aftertaste that quickly gave way to a feeling of warmth spreading through his body. His head spun slightly, but the fear remained. Immediately after this, a strange ritual began. The leader stood before Antonio. Communication occurred solely through gestures and images projected onto the wall in front of them. These were not just drawings, but rather dynamic, glowing diagrams and symbols. Antonio saw images of Earth, schematic figures of people, an image of their ship flying towards the planet. Then more complex symbols appeared, spirals, triangles, intersecting lines. The leader pointed alternately at the images, at Antonio, and at himself. His gestures were fluid, almost hypnotic. Antonio strained all his attention, trying to understand the meaning of this silent message. Gradually, He got the impression that they were trying to explain their origin or the purpose of their